What does it mean when an election delivers a near-total victory before the first ballot is even cast? And why does it matter far beyond one country's borders? In Myanmar, a military-backed party has just secured more than 80% of elected parliamentary seats, while millions remain displaced and fighting continues nationwide. The question is not who won, but what this result reveals about power, legitimacy, and the future of a country sitting at the crossroads of Asia. If this political transition stabilizes the military's rule, Myanmar could lock in a new status quo that reshapes regional diplomacy for years. If it fails, the country risks deeper fragmentation, prolonged conflict, and wider spillover into neighboring states. If it escalates, the election itself may become a catalyst for intensified resistance, sanctions pressure, and geopolitical realignment. Each outcome carries consequences not just for Myanmar's people, but for Southeast Asia's balance between sovereignty, stability, and international norms. To understand how Myanmar arrived here, it is necessary to return to the structure of its political system and the shock of the 2021 coup. That year, the military overturned the results of a national election that had given Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy a landslide victory. The armed forces detained senior civilian leaders, suspended the constitution, and justified the takeover by alleging electoral irregularities. Pro-democracy protests followed across major cities, and the subsequent crackdown transformed demonstrations into an armed resistance that spread nationwide. 4 years later, the country remains locked in conflict. Armed ethnic organizations and newer resistance groups control or contest large areas, while the military maintains dominance over major cities and infrastructure. According to United Nations estimates, approximately 3.6 million people have been displaced since the coup, one of the largest internal displacement crises in Asia. The election that concluded in late January unfolded within this reality, not in a post-conflict environment. The voting process itself was staged in 3 phases, beginning on December 28th, and ending more than 4 years after the coup. Polling took place in 263 of Myanmar's 330 townships, reflecting the military's limited territorial control. Entire regions were excluded due to ongoing fighting, logistical barriers, or security concerns. Even within participating areas, political competition was tightly restricted. The Union Solidarity and Development Party, widely viewed as aligned with the military, emerged as the dominant force. Official results show the party won 232 of 263 available seats in the lower house and 109 of 157 announced seats in the upper chamber. These figures represent an overwhelming majority of contested seats, before accounting for the constitutional provision that automatically allocates 25% of parliamentary seats to serving military officers. This structural guarantee is critical. Even in a hypothetical scenario where opposition parties won every elected seat, the armed forces would still retain veto power over constitutional change. In this election, that safeguard was reinforced by the dissolution of the National League for Democracy and dozens of other parties, alongside boycotts by several remaining groups. The field was narrowed long before voters entered polling stations. Turnout across the 3 phases reached about 55%, significantly lower than the roughly 70% participation recorded in previous national elections in 2015 and 2020. Those earlier polls, including the 2020 vote later annulled by the Junta, were held nationwide and under more competitive conditions. The reduced turnout reflects both logistical barriers and widespread skepticism about the process itself. The military leadership has framed the election as a step toward restoring order and transferring responsibility to a civilian-led government. Parliament is expected to convene in March to select a president, with a new administration scheduled to take office in April. The head of the junta is widely expected to remain central to governance, regardless of formal titles, maintaining continuity in decision-making. International reaction has been largely dismissive. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations has declined to endorse the process, consistent with its earlier criticism of Myanmar's failure to implement a regional peace plan. Western governments and human rights organizations have also rejected the election's legitimacy, arguing it was designed to institutionalize military rule rather than resolve the conflict. This places Myanmar in a familiar but increasingly entrenched position, diplomatically isolated from parts of the West, yet not entirely cut off. The military government continues to engage selectively with neighboring countries, regional partners, and external actors willing to prioritize stability or strategic interests over democratic legitimacy. One possible future path is consolidation. If the military-backed administration manages to maintain control over key economic hubs and suppress resistance in central regions, the election could provide a veneer of continuity that reduces internal elite fragmentation. Over time, some regional actors may normalize engagement, particularly if violence stabilizes at a lower but persistent level. Another scenario points in the opposite direction. If resistance groups interpret the election as confirmation that political pathways are closed, armed conflict could intensify. Increased coordination among ethnic armed organizations and newer resistance forces might stretch military resources further, prolonging instability and deepening humanitarian costs. In that case, the election would mark not an endpoint, but a turning point toward protracted conflict. The broader geopolitical implications extend beyond Myanmar's borders. Continued instability affects trade corridors linking South and Southeast Asia, complicates border security for neighboring states, and tests ASEAN's ability to manage internal crises. It also raises questions about how international norms around elections and legitimacy are applied when sovereignty, security, and power intersect. As Myanmar moves toward the formal seating of a new government, the critical signals will come not from parliamentary numbers, but from developments on the ground. Changes in displacement trends, battlefield dynamics, and regional diplomatic engagement will reveal whether this election represents consolidation, stagnation, or escalation. For now, the result underscores a central tension shaping Myanmar's future: the gap between control and consent. Power has been secured through institutions, force, and managed political processes, but stability remains elusive. What happens next will depend on whether authority can translate into governance, or whether conflict continues to define the country's trajectory in the years ahead.